it's Coach Tori, and this is Raising Runners. We talk running, fitness, mental health, and so many more topics. As the founder of a youth running program, I approach all of our conversations with our youth athletes in mind and kind of have a focus around those things. But as you will see, we are finding that all of these topics relate to runners and people who like to move and do fitness or anything like that. Relates to everybody. Check it out. In today's episode, I get to talk with Lindsay about the Alexander technique. So we are talking about posture. She shares some common postural issues that she sees. She talks about how she helps people through those things, and then also some common things that cause all the posture stuff that we see. She also helps us relate it to running. Lots of injuries can be caused from postural problems. So we really talk through that. She helps me with something I didn't even notice that she saw on our Zoom meeting, which was really cool. And then she also helps cue the audience through just some tweaks to our posture. So really awesome. Check it out. All right. Well, as I'll let you get a drink first. Okay. Yeah. If you want to just tell us who you are, so we all know who we are hearing from today.
Sure. My name is Lindsay Newitter, and I am an Alexander technique teacher, which basically means a lot of the time I call myself a posture coach. And what I do is I help people with the underlying habits that are affecting all the things they do. So whether it's skills they have in athletic skills, or musical skills, or simply sitting at their desk, or just doing everyday things around the house or with their families, there are often habits in terms of how we hold ourselves up and how we just coordinate moving around, holding ourselves up, and breathing, that can have an effect on us, doing the things we want to do in a way that feels good, that's efficient, and that doesn't leave us feeling like we're in pain at the end of the day, and ultimately that gets us the results we want. Depending on what it is. If it's doing your dishes, you might not really care as long as they're in the dishwasher. But if it's running a race, or they're doing something competitive, it does mean something.
So now, is that what you just explained, like your philosophy on posture, or is that actually what the Alexander technique means? Or what is the Alexander technique then for posture?
Well, I'll give you a bit of background on that. It's my take on it, but I guess it's a bit of a summary about what the Alexander technique helps with. And the technique itself, it dates back to over 100 years ago. So this has been around. The person who created it, his name was F.M. Alexander. He was born in 1869. And so it's not new, but it's something that tends to be known in the performing arts world more than anything. And so it's something that a lot of people haven't heard of. And then when they find out about it, they realize, oh, this actually, this isn't something that's just for actors and musicians. This helps me run better. This helps me get through my workday better. This could help my kid, deal with all their screen time better. Or, I always find my kids slouching at dinner. So, but what it actually came from was this guy, Alexander, who was a public performer. He was a Shakespearean actor, actually, and he would declaim these Shakespearean texts in public and had quite a following. He was in Australia at the time, and he kept losing his voice. And he'd go to see doctors, and they'd say, well, go on vocal rest and get better. And then he'd start performing again, and he would lose his voice pretty systematically, partway through his performance. So he decided to investigate this further, and he thought there must be something I'm doing, something habitually that I'm doing that's causing this issue. And he realized that every time he went to speak, that he was tightening his neck, and that was creating this sort of like pulling down of the head into his spine. So he was, if you imagine, so if you're listening to this, if you imagine that there's suddenly a loud sound, right? And you sort of go like, your neck sort of tightens. And what happens is it sort of locks the head down on top of the spine. Another way this happens is, like, let's say your screen won't load. Like you're looking at your iPhone and the little thing, and you're like, come on. Or you're really like, enthusiastic about something, or you're frustrated with something, you're emphasizing, right? We see people do this all the time. They kind of tighten their necks. And what it usually feels like is you're pushing your face forward. That's the sensation of that. You're pushing your face forward. And it's often called head forward posture. But if we actually look at what's happening, and this is what Alexander discovered, that even though the head, if you do that kind of movement, it's going forward with your neck because your head's attached to your neck, but your head is actually tilting back at the same time, and it's pressing down on your spine. And the reason why this is super important is because your head's really heavy. You have any idea how much your head weighs?
I want to say like 9 pounds, and I think I heard that in trivia. Am I close?
Close. So
Okay.
it's usually like 10 to 12 pounds.
Oh
Yeah,
my
so a little
gosh.
heavier. Yeah. And we don't usually notice that. I remember when I was a kid, I would sometimes lie on my bed and just hang my head off the bed and feel the weight of it. And I'd be like, wow, my head's heavy. But anyway, the point of this is that has a major impact on the whole body. And it's really tied to how we do a lot of things. So, how we might create effort to speak or effort just to look at something. Most people, they pick up their screens or they look at their computers, and they get this sort of like lockdown of the head and neck. And it trickles down the whole body. So we often think of poor posture as being slouching, like the shoulders slouching. But often what triggers that is that kind of movement of the head. And sometimes it's a little more passive as well. So that's just sort of letting the whole head and neck drop down, like to look at the phone or to look down to do something. And so there'll be compensations going on in your back and your shoulders, in your hips and your legs, in affect you all the way down to your feet. So that's usually what I start with people, and that was Alexander's big discovery, that little thing that he was doing and that he realized most people tend to do it's like this big trigger in terms of what's happening in the body.
Wow. Well, first of all, I want to say, and everyone can't see you, but I can so tell that you do this for a living and you coach just because of all like the isolated movements you can do while you're explaining, like your head's doing this. So that's just really cool. And I know like it's dumb to point out because no one else can see you but me, but I'm telling everybody it's really cool. So I was going to ask you how posture affects movement, but I feel like you kind of just explained that in everything you just said. But is there, I guess, anything else to add to like how our posture is affecting how we're moving? Obviously, we just learned that it can affect our voice and all of that, and it trickles down. But is there anything else to add before I move on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you were saying about what you were noticing about my movements, that you were noticing I could articulate different areas. Like, I'm like right now I'm moving my head, but I'm not moving my neck. And now I'm moving my head and my neck at the same time. Right. And I think often people don't even know they can separate those movements. So I don't know if a little later, if you wanted me to kind of go through something that you could actually, like, you could practice it right now and your listeners could practice, we could do that, a little experience of that. But part of doing that is actually being able to sense where things are. And I bet if I show you one little thing, you'll be able to sense where your head is and be able to do what I just did a little bit better. But to get to your question about movement, so, people might be saying, well, this is, was developed by an actor who had a vocal problem, and so like how could this somebody help somebody who's an athlete or a runner, and really just it can help someone who's in sports and you know, moving a lot just as much. And something that often happens, I just give you a few examples in regards to running. I work with a fair number of runners, and you do sometimes see, you know, I think people have this idea of poor posture being that everything's slumping down here. And people can't see me, but I'm just letting like my shoulders drop forward, my head drop forward, everything's just dropping forward. And you do occasionally see people doing that. And you do sometimes see people running like that. And it might be pretty obvious that that's not probably the most efficient running. But what I see even more than that is people overcorrecting. So they're kind of overcorrecting their posture. They're kind of lifting their chest. And, you know, there might be sort of lifting their chin up, trying to pull their shoulders back as they run.
Yeah.
They actually end up leaning back. And what you can see, and this is where we can kind of connect, you know, sitting at the computer with running, is that a lot of people, if they slouch when they're sitting, when they stand, walk, run, they actually end up leaning backwards. So it's almost like the head, neck, and like upper torso are sort of glued together. And when the people are sitting, they kind of tip forward from the waist. And when they're standing, they kind of tip backward from the waist. And they sort of chunk all those parts together as if they're glued together. And so if you are tipping your upper body back while you're trying to move forward, there's a little bit of a conflict there. So Tori, can you kind of see what I mean? That just in terms of
right
where your body weight's going? Yeah. So how that could look is, you know, it could feel more effortful, say if you're running like that. And it could also, you could create a situation where your quads are working really hard to keep you from falling backwards. So if you start to, if you try standing up and you exaggerate kind of leaning back, you'll probably feel your quads start to engage a little more just to keep you from falling backwards.
Right.
But if you're standing more balanced, your glutes will be a little more involved. The backs of the legs will be a little more involved. So same with running. If you're more vertical or a little bit forward, then you're going to get the back of the body to work a bit more. And that's what people are always talking about, like, you know, oh, your glutes are switched off, right?
Right.
But a lot of that can have to do with what's going on above them.
Well, it's so interesting because I'm sorry if I cut you off. I just got excited.
No. Tell me if I'm talking too much. Just interrupt me.
Oh, that will never be the case. I love when I don't have to talk as much. But so I have been struggling with glute activation when I've been running recently, which is never a huge issue for me. Like maybe like very briefly would have, you know, just, you know, tweak a few things. But my son is 1.5. So ever since having him, running is just, it is not like glutes not doing it. And I'm now thinking, you know, I've just been doing all the things they tell you to do with like, you know, the glute bridges and all kinds of other fire hydrants. But now I'm thinking it probably has a lot to do with, because I'm always holding him and you kind of do that like tailbone tuck a little bit the way you hold, right? You don't stand with great posture when you're holding another person ever, no matter how much you try. But I imagine, I'm sure because I do that often, that is probably just leading to everything just being a little off, right? That makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And, you know, I like how you're making the connections here, so that the holding the baby can affect how you run. The sitting at the computer could affect how you run, how you sit in the car, or, you know, how you do things affects how you do other things. And what FM Alexander said was use affects function. How you use your body affects how you will function. And so you could say that sort of broadly, or, you know, how you use your body, like, you know, what you're doing most of the day doing will help you will affect you in this specific, you know, other thing you're doing.
Right. So you talked about how people often tend to like overcorrect after that. And that made me think of, especially when you're younger and, people say like, stop slouching or make sure you have good posture. And
Yeah.
everyone does like, this thing. Is there like, as I put in quotes, good posture, or it kind of also sounds like it may depend on what you're doing at that time, how it should look. But is there like, if I said, what's good posture? Is there like actually a thing that it is?
Yeah, and well, I think you're on the right track when you're talking about it. It kind of depends on what you're doing. So something I like to say is that your posture moves with you. Your posture it's not a position that you hold and like, don't move from that position. In fact, if you're holding a rigid position to try to have good posture, you're probably making your posture worse. So it's really about being in balance and not interfering with the way the body naturally wants to move. And what tends to interfere with our posture is that we kind of might not really sense what we're doing. So there are the habits that build up and sort of get in the way. But then we can lose all sort of sense of where things are. Just like when you said, oh, wow, I could see that you can tell where your head's moving, where your neck's moving. Because I've practiced sensing that. So that's a big part of when I work with people, what I'm teaching them. It's really how to be present in yourself and to know where your body parts are. So you know what you're moving and you're not just like, on this runaway train of whatever your habit happens to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. And also like, obviously it's probably not just as simple as like use good posture, right? With like that super arched back. So,
Yeah.
it makes sense that you're saying like different things in different situations. And then with that, I know you kind of talked about, especially with like a slumped over in chairs, but are there other common postural issues that you see? I'm sure like people with the phones, because we're always doing this with like no one can see me, the heads are down. Like, are there
Mm-hmm.
other common things that you see that are probably a big product of the way our lives are, I'm guessing?
Yeah. What just popped into my head was backpacks. And I'm a
Yeah.
parent, and I get a lot of parents asking me about how to help their kids. I end up working with a fair number of teens pretty regularly. And I remember when my husband saw my daughter's backpack and he was like, we're weighing that. And, said, you got to take like 10 pounds off of that. And, part of it is, yeah, I think sometimes kids are carrying way too much stuff, but there's also just how they're actually, managing their own body, carrying the backpack, walking. And if you think of all the things you might be doing, let's say while you carry a backpack, you might be walking, you might be looking at a phone, you might be, adjusting your coat or your hat, or you might be opening a door or looking where you're going or reading something. So there's a lot going on. And if you have a better sort of background awareness of where your body is, you can kind of learn to automatically adjust without getting distracted. So it's not about having some like thing that you have to overthink about, but it's really improving that baseline body awareness. Are you familiar with the term proprioception? Is that something that you're?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I feel like I just recently heard someone talking about it and now I'm drawing a blank. We were talking about like sensory issues and proprioception, but tell us what that means.
Yeah, it would make sense. It would come up in that context. So
Okay.
proprioception is a sense that we have, like we have a sense of smell, a sense of taste. So it's our sense of where we are. And so there are actually nerves in our joints that tell our brain what our body position is. And, it's telling you like where your limbs are in relation to one another, right? Like you kind of like, where your hand is, even if you're not looking at it. That's an example. It helps you understand how much effort you need to do something. Have you ever picked something up, you thought it was heavy, but it was light, and you were like, your arm sort of flew up to the ceiling?
Right.
Yeah, right. So that would be an example of your proprioception you were basing something, on what you were looking at, and you made an assumption, and so your proprioception gave you the information you needed to lift that thing you thought was heavy, but it wasn't. So it also has to do with our balance. So it kind of it's like our GPS system for ourselves. And
Right.
in most people, it's working fine, but it's usually a little off. Like if you imagine a compass, it's like that proprioceptive compass is probably not quite pointing north, right? So it's like you're going around with a compass that isn't pointing north. But it's like, how do you know
Right.
what to do then? Because that's sort of what you know. It's like if your glasses are, if you put on like a pair of blue glasses, everything sort of looks blue. And if you did that all the time, you just think, well, the world is kind of tinted blue. So what the Alexander technique helps with, it's really great for, is kind of recalibrating that proprioceptive sense, helping you to understand where your joints are, where your body is in space, so that you know what you're moving, how you're moving it, that you know what position you're in. Usually the first time I work with somebody, they'll be standing straight, like by the end of the session, and they'll say, I feel like I'm leaning forward. They'll say, I feel like I'm sticking my butt out. And I'll point to a mirror, and they look in the mirror and they go, what? I'm not. They're like, that's crazy. And I mean, I had the same experience when I first had that kind of change. But you can adapt, and then you're like, oh, your compass is pointing north, so you're getting the right feedback.
Wow. That's really cool. And that's going to be, well, my next question was going to be, how do you address these postural issues? But it sounds like you kind of just explained that. Would now be a time that you'd want to do, like, helping, us as listeners and me kind of
Yeah.
figure out how to move, or whatever you said you were going to have us do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Sure. So I'm just going to start up here with the head and the neck, because that addressing that first tends to have a good effect on a lot of other things. So I think I was talking a little bit before about the neck getting tight, the head sort of tipping back and getting kind of stuck in what we call head forward posture, but it's really more like neck forward posture. So what I want you to feel actually is that if you did that, if you sort of like push your face forward, so just push your face forward. Can you feel the back of your neck tightening up a little?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And try to identify where you're bending in your neck. It's sort of like mid neck.
Yeah.
And so I could see you, so I could see that's what you're doing.
Am I doing it right?
Yeah. So we're kind of doing the wrong thing right, just to feel what that's like. Yeah. And so a lot of people are bending their neck like halfway down, or like all the way at the base of the neck. Like imagine if you just picked up your smartphone and you just sort of thunk, and just try to actually, you're not doing it too badly, but just let the whole boom. No, the whole head and neck drop from the base of the neck. It's another thing people do. So those are the two kind of ways we want to avoid. But what happens is we can kind of habitually end up using the middle of the neck or the bottom of the neck as this kind of constant hinge, whereas that's not really where we should be hinging from. And the thing that's more like a hinge or a place to begin articulating from when you want to move your head is actually way up between your ears and behind your nose. So it's pretty high. So if you put your fingers, like in the middle of your ears, and if you actually like reach around the back, and you can feel there's kind of a bony area at the bottom of your skull where your head meets your neck. So just feel like where there's a clear place where you can feel, okay, that's bone, that's my head. And then just feel, okay, that's muscle down there, that's my neck. You might feel your spine a little bit. Yeah. And then that's how high your spine goes, all the way up there.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
And
Weird.
just trace
Okay.
around if you kind of bypass the middle of your ears again and you go, what's on the other side of the base of my skull? Yeah, you end up at the bottom of your nose. So your spine, if you like think about that, your spine goes up to where the bottom of your nose is. And so that's
Wow.
really a lot higher than like chin level, which is where a lot of people are bending from a lot, or even lower. So what if, let's say we're going to use the looking at the phone thing, because that's just an easy thing to do if you're just, sitting around listening to this. So I want you to like do what you think you normally do first to look at the phone. Just kind of drop down. And then what I want you to do is hold the phone, but ignore it. So just look across the room. If you're outside, just kind of, look way out in front of you. And I want you to now look at the phone by first moving your eyes. Don't move your head. And then I want you to just nod your head a little bit and think of moving it from way up high between your ears and behind your nose. And it should just be a tiny little movement to look at that phone.
I feel like I must never do that because it kind of feels hard to do.
Yeah.
So I think the muscles don't know how to do that.
Well, it's possible. Sometimes there's a bit of tightness in the back of the neck. If you do, tense back there a lot. And if you sort of move your head forward, you might feel a stretch back there. It might be like, ooh, it's a little tight.
Yeah. Wow.
So it should just be a gentle movement, not pulling your chin in, but can you just gently look down a little?
Oh, I was pulling my chin in. You're right.
Is that better?
That is better. Okay,
So
that is good.
Go ahead.
No, so I must always be bending with my throat because even when you were explaining like why the Alexander technique was invented with like his throat getting worn out, my throat is always, by the end of the day, I'm like strained talking. And I'm sure that's because I'm always like hinging in the middle of my throat.
Or you might be kind of pushing a bit.
Oh, I definitely do that.
So if you put your hand on the back of your neck and if you go like, hey,
Yeah, hey.
Yeah, can you feel that you're actually tipping back?
Yeah.
Can you feel that? Even if it feels like you're
lot.
pushing your face forward. Yeah. So
yeah, I gotta work on that.
Create strain. And what I would challenge you to do is also when you run, see if you notice if you do that. Like when you transition. So, and this is a moment I run, and if I start to feel like I'm getting tight, I'll, maybe stop, walk, and I'll just be really conscious about how I'm starting to accelerate. And I'll take my my clients through this as well and just go, what's happening in that moment between walking and then starting to run? Are you locking your head down to your neck? Are you like hoisting your chest up? Are you creating a lot of stiffness? And see if you can you make that transition without doing that?
Yeah, I imagine I must do that too, because now as I'm trying to sit here and thinking, okay, stop doing this with my head and neck, I'm like, this doesn't feel normal at all, but it feels way better. I must always be just doing this all day long.
Well, yeah. So I think you're right on track because it won't feel normal at first. And that's good.
But it feels better.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So now, do you see people in person and virtually? Because it seems like you do really well telling people it is on virtually. Okay.
I do both. Yeah. And a lot of the virtual really started with the pandemic. I'd done a little bit before then, but in 2020, that was all I could do for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I found it very helpful actually, because people have to kind of figure it out for themselves. But the in-person is great. They're different.
I'm sure. So now, does that look kind of like what we just did here? Or like if I come to you and I'm saying, I guess, why would if I have no awareness of my posture and it being bad, right? I had no idea I was doing this weird thing with my throat that's exhausting me. Like, how are people finding you? Is it because they have like performance issues? Is it like, I guess, yeah, what would prompt me to be like, oh, my posture, that's it?
Yeah, because it's sort of a funny thing because, if someone's like has no awareness, how do they know what they need? They're not
Right. But I
coming.
feel like
They're
they
not.
definitely need it.
They're not usually coming to me telling me I need help with that thing that I just showed you. They don't realize it. They usually notice. There's a problem with their posture, but they usually notice something about their shoulders, and that's what they're trying to fix. They keep trying to pull their shoulders back, and then they're uncomfortable, and they're like, I can't maintain it, and then they feel bad about themselves. And people can be very self-critical, thinking they've been trying so hard to fix this, but it's just the approach. And so often it's just showing people a different approach to improving their posture, because what they've been trying hasn't been working. And then sometimes it's people coming to me because like they're having issues with running, or they're having back pain or neck pain at their desk, or they see their teenager is how they're walking or sitting, or a lot of people worried about their teenagers, and kind of going along the first point, just the person who is just overall concerned about their posture, often it's they don't like how it looks, they don't like how it makes them feel. They want to kind of present themselves differently in the world, which
Wow.
which I think is really interesting to work on. And it just it relates to your whole kind of mental state and outlook, and I think that was something that kind of interested you, that piece of things, right? Is that right?
What piece?
Of like the idea of like your kind of mental state. I remember in what I read that what you wrote.
Yes, now I can't even remember what I was trying to accomplish, because I don't think I necessarily was thinking posture when I wrote that, but I might have just been talking. Oh no, I maybe did, because one of the lessons we teach the kids, we try to incorporate
Mhm.
posture into running, and we talk about how like the way you feel affects the way that you move. And then we also try and have them, do a certain kind of posture. Now I'm like worried I may be having them overcorrect a little bit, because we do talk about chest forward and how that doesn't look like chest up or chest down. But I'm sure there's other cues for them. But we also try to talk about like, okay, thinking of happy emotions. What does happy feel like? Your shoulders are relaxed, they're down. You're smiling, so that usually releases tension everywhere, below that. So yeah, so no, you're right. Now I'm like, where did I even get to hear from? But yeah, right. The
Yeah.
way, exactly. I mean, and recently actually I interviewed someone about self-defense, and she talked a lot about like posture, and like the way we are presenting ourselves to the world can completely change if someone would target us for some kind of attack too, which is like not exactly what we're talking about, but yeah, like all of that posture really does affect the way we present to the world, which is really interesting.
It is. And I mean, there's a very sort of like like energetic quality to that as well. It's sort of what your presence, like if you're, and people can tell. I think that people read each other all the time. We don't even necessarily know what we're doing, but you can see if somebody's present. You can see if they're not paying attention. You can see if they're, if they're kind of in their body, or if they're sort of elsewhere. And just in terms of being I mean, I remember at one point I realized, I'm not getting, cat calls on the street. Like it was like, it was over like a 2-year period. I was training to be an Alexander teacher. And I was like, I feel just a lot more at ease walking around the city.
Yeah, it is crazy to think that like we also aren't very aware, I don't think, of like that we're perceiving someone's posture in any kind of way, but it's just like in
Hmm.
our brains all of a sudden
Oh
we're like,
yeah.
we take qualities off of people just by the way they're moving through the world. So the people that come to you who want to change the way that they are presenting or movement, do you see a change in them, like more of their like mental health? Even, I mean, maybe it wasn't like a mental health issue or anything, but like, do you see a change in the way that they present besides just their
Like
bodies.
kind of
And
what
does
they
that
give
question
off.
make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm like, I can't think of how I'm
like,
trying to ask that.
oh yeah. And sometimes it's like, it's really cool. It's really, man, I'm like, hi, who are you? The person who's leaving the room is sort of different than the person who walked in. And, sometimes they'll say, my friend said something was different, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it, or a family member, or they'll say, did you lose weight? But they're sort of standing different. And there can be a sort of presence and just confidence. You're just taking up your space and actually knowing what that means. It's not it's not lifting your chest and,
Right.
kind
Because
of
that
pushing
doesn't feel
yourself
great
out.
either. Right.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love this so much. Well, Lindsay, I don't have any other questions for you, but do you have anything you want to add that I didn't ask? And then where can we find you if we need to correct all of our postural things?
Well, something I thought of, which, and I know you work with young athletes and, kids. Do you in teens as well, or is it mostly younger kids, or?
It's like young teens. So like we don't usually go
Mhm.
past like 14, 15.
Okay. And I think that, sometimes parents want some guidance for helping their kids with stuff like this. And like all they know is, pointing it out, like, oh, you're slouching, or sit up straight. But just having
Right.
some tools to help them so that they can, do it in a way that's more sustainable, kind of feel good about themselves so they're not being corrected. And I have two teens myself, and I think that, one of the things that I try to do is just, I sort of observe them and I let them observe me, and I try to provide an example. But I also just, I might just sort of gently point something out. Like if one of them has an iPad on a desk and they're sort of like leaning over it, I might just say move it up, or just, I might ask, is that comfortable? Or like, do you think you might feel more comfortable if we put a pillow behind you? Or just sort of like look at what they're doing. Notice, are their feet on the floor? So this is a big thing, and it's something that I would say to, kind of watch with kids. When they're sitting in a chair, are they able to put their feet on the floor? Because if you're not, that you're not really getting any support. So that can have a big effect on your posture.
Wow.
And it's a simple thing. So these are just sort of like simple cues that you could give kids, and just to get them aware that this might be something they might want to think about without kind of nagging them.
I was gonna say, and I'm not at that point yet because my son is still young, but I'm remembering us as kids, and then, seeing other people with kids, there's the constant, like, don't sit on your foot, don't sit this way, don't sit that way. And it's like,
Mhm.
right, because I'm sure those are all like postural things within them, but then we become naggy because we want them to sit
Mhm.
correctly. So no, I think that's great and super helpful.
Yeah. But if they sit on their feet, it's not always bad, but I would say, make sure they have some place that their feet actually reach the floor if you're telling them not to sit on their feet.
Right. Yes, that makes sense. Um, awesome. Well, I'm glad you shared that with us because, again, that is super helpful, and that really definitely relates to the population that I work with. Um, where can we find you if we? And I'm obviously going to link everything into the notes, but just so people, if they're looking for you.
Yeah, you can go to my website. So lindsaynewitter.com. And so that's LINDSAY, Newitter, NEWITTER.com. And you'll see that I have classes for everybody. I have classes that are specifically for professional women, and I have corporate classes as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. This was really fun, and I also feel like I learned a lot, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my evening being really aware of all of my movement because my body is always exhausted now, and I'm sure that's a lot of slouching and other weird things. So this was
Well,
really fun.
I'd be curious what you notice when you go for your next run. If you can feel, if you do the same thing with the neck as you
Yes,
notice
no,
when you're
I'm gonna have
speaking.
to
Yeah.
check. Yeah, because I think as soon as you point, like, I don't even know if you pointed out or we just, while I was moving, noticed it, but yeah, I feel like I must be doing that all the time because I feel like there's just a constant strain here. So I'm going to notice on my run, and when I send you when the episode comes out, I will let you know if I do that or not.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, well, thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you. It was nice talking.
I just want to thank Lindsay so much for the time and all the really valuable information that she gave today. It was really cool being able to take some of the things that we talked about and then notice it while I was running the next time I ran after talking with her. So really cool. Also check out her website. There is a 30-minute video on there that everyone can check out. All you have to do is enter your email address. So that's really awesome too. And I also just want to point out running coaching. I am doing virtual, online. I guess virtual and online are the same, right? I am doing a virtual private running coaching through Team Run. So check out the link under coaching. I am doing a discount for all of the listeners. So you just use discount code RR podcast for Raising Runners podcast, and you will get a discount there. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe, all the things that you can do for a podcast that you enjoy listening to. Make sure you check out social media, our website, any of those things. If you have questions, comments, interview requests, feel free to email me at marikeyrunclub@gmail.com.